All right, well, good morning, everyone. We'll just let you settle into your seats, kick back, relax, as you remember that you meant to vote this morning. I just wanted to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people, traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathering today, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend those respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who might be here today. You know, I spend my week on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I travel home to the lands of the Wadi Wadi people down in Dharawal Nation. And living as we do on a country like this, with the oldest living culture, a culture built on storytelling and the sharing of stories, I think it's really great just to remind ourselves that that's what we're here to do today with the last day of the BAD Festival. For those of you who don't know, my name is Andy Muir and I'm your facilitator for the next hour. For those of you who we haven't met, shame on you. But I'm a screenwriter, I'm a crime author, and I'm a museum curator and previous member of the BAD board. But you are not here to hear from me. Unfortunately, I do have to do some housekeeping. So please mute your mobile phones, don't record the session. If you are taking photos, please turn off your flash. There's nothing worse than a startled guest. Feel free to share on social media and tag us on Facebook and Instagram using @BadCrimeSydney or with the hashtag #BadCrimeSydney. And so that you can hear more from your panel this morning, we are trialling a question-free session, which came from feedback from previous festivals where they wanted more from the authors and less from the crowd. If you disagree with that, feel free to email the board after the festival and say you want questions back. So now that I've got all of that out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce the panel for this morning. Authors that if you don't know, you will be wanting to rush out to the bookshop afterwards and buy all of their books and then ask your questions you didn't get to ask in the session as they sign your books, captive. So, first of all, Anna Downs. Anna is the author of Safe Place, The Shadow House, and now Red River Road. She began her career as an actor in the UK, but she now calls Australia home. Please welcome Anna. Then in the middle we have Dave Warner, who almost needs no introduction, but he is a screenwriter, musician and author of 12 novels. And we are here to be talking about his latest, featuring the Broome-based detective Dan Clement, which is the 5th in the series. When It Rains is the title. Dave Warner. And last but not least is Holly Craig, possibly the only person on this panel who actually still lives in WA. Holly has 2 books to her name, her best-selling debut, The Shallows, and her second, The Rip, which we are here to talk about today. So please welcome Holly. Now, I did ask the panellists to prepare a reading to kick this off because we are talking about WA, a place we are a long way away from, to sort of set the scene and get a sense of what is this strange place we call WA. So does one of our lovely panellists like to kick off with a reading?
Should I, because I'm from there?
And you're the furthest away from me, so...
Just kick it. Okay. I've got a teacher voice anyway, so I'm quite loud.
He's ready now, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, is it working?
That's right. We are going out to Zoom and some local libraries.
Oh, okay. Is it working?
But your one looks like it has got a...
Is this one working?
Looks like it has
Yeah, maybe swap.
Holly.
Okay, good.
There we go. That's better.
Yeah,
Thank you.
There's tech
Okay, let's
support
start.
places down.
Okay. So my novel, The Rip, is set on Rottnest Island, Wodgema, and it's a place that's very special to me. So I actually started the novel after the prologue with chapter 1, just really going into detail about the setting. So really to set up that imagery and immerse the reader like within that setting of Rottnest. So here we go. Penny, 11:03 a.m. There are dangers on Rottnest Island, but we don't tell the kids that. Our villa overlooks the bay with a balcony hanging over sharp spinifex grass that detaches in the sea breeze. Their needles are covered in sand, ready to prick your bare soles. You have to pull them out and limp quickly away, especially in October when the dugite snakes start mating and hide shyly in the bushes. Blue bottle jellyfish wash up on the shores, their pearly cobalt crowns able to pop, then smother a toe with a stinging rash. Sharks have been spotted haunting the reef off the beach at Thompson Bay. Rays glide under dinghies matching their girth. The meeting of currents, the swirling offshore rips, suck the unwary out to sea. If the kids knew about this, knew about the dangers, they'd never leave us alone. There's nowhere else in the world you can leave your kids unsupervised, Mum and Dad used to say. This was code for, we can drink all the wine we want, neglect the kids, and no one will bat an eyelid. And this is true, actually. It's simply island tradition. Kids cycle off exploring, parents gift them $5 to buy all the sugar they need to keep them quiet, entertained, while the parents grow louder, entertaining themselves. Our villa is the most sought-after accommodation on the island. In the afternoons, the sun blasts half the balcony, and you can choose whether you want to toast your legs or cool them off in the shade. The balcony faces the ferry jetty. Every so often, the ferry arrives, disgorging hordes of noisy tourists and regular visitors who ride around the island like they own the place. There's a certain possessiveness that arouses visitors here, a sense of ownership over the island. If you spent your childhood here as privileged offspring of boaties, then you've earned bragging rights over those who haven't. They are less than you. You see this superior attitude all the time in the zigzagging riding around the island without a helmet, people barefooted with a few stubbed toes, in the order of pims at the pub, the rebellious dragging of chairs onto the sand away from the rest of the crowd. Children of boaties are entitled on this island, separate and proud to be. As adults, they stroll around the village with their newspaper stuck under their arm, knowing exactly which meat pie to buy, where to order the best coffee. You often hear them reminiscing about the days spent here as kids, when they cycle around the island until dusk, when they become too hungry to keep playing, craving a sausage in a floppy bun. And then it keeps on going on, and I'll just read that last bit, which just says, this prime spot on the balcony allows me to gaze at the guys flinging their fishing lines from the boats and the sunbathers flipping like seals on the sand. I can predict the weather from here, identify when the wind is about to switch, chopping the sea into sharp waves. From the balcony vantage point, I get to be in control over the island, the comings and goings of everyone.
All right, so we've worked out that one is set on Rottnest Island. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next and then go in the middle. Okay, so this one, When It Rains, is set up in the East Kimberley, primarily around Kununurra, where Carolyn Overington there and I had the great fortune to go to the Kununurra Writers' Festival some years ago, and of course, you know, murder, crocodiles, Kununurra all kind of went in one. So normally I would read something early in the book, but in this book I wanted to kind of get the idea of the threat of the whole, just where you're at, and so I'm doing something rare, which is reading from towards the end of the book. With all the adrenaline already flooding through him, Clement doubted that his heart could beat any faster. However, as he moved along the narrow strip of muddy flat between the water and the wet grasses, he was sure his heart rate kicked up a notch. He reached a jutting chin of rock that forced him to clamber around it, looking for a handhold on decaying branches. There was no way of seeing what lay on the other side. He could pretty much step on a big croc. He edged around, breathed a sigh. Clear. But as his left foot landed, it skidded on the mud and sent him tumbling. He picked himself up, glanced up, and his heart stopped. 10 metres ahead was another mini promontory, a paper bark trunk near its tip and one of its branches hanging out over the river. Dangling from the branch, her hands looped by the rope, her arms stretching up and head lolled forward, was Bella Tate. From the navel down, her body was below water. Clement did his best to run. Was she alive? He couldn't tell. He yelled her name, but there was no reaction. Close now. Clement saw the rope was secured around the tree trunk. Even if he could cut it, that would only drop her into the water. And now as he looked directly out towards the middle of the river, about 30 metres offshore, he saw a tiny mud island, and lying on it, a large crocodile. Shit. He had a gun, but no knife. But Graham did. He fumbled for his radio. No time for protocol. "Come in, Graham." "Yes, mate, she's here. I need a knife, fast." He told him to head along the bank to the promontory. All the time his gaze never left the island. The croc hadn't moved. He tried to estimate the time, wondered about hypothermia. The temperature wasn't too bad and a wedge of sun was just now breaking through. But maybe that was a bad thing. Had the croc just moved, or had he imagined that? "Mate!" Earl had made good time and was calling from the promontory. "Toss it!" called Clement, trying to run towards him over the treacherous mud. Earl looped the small pocket knife through the air. Clement snaffled it. "Get ready to shoot that bloody thing," Clement yelled, but as he turned back, the crocodile was no longer visible. He raced, almost slid back to the tree. There was no getting up to the bow. The only way he was going to free Balatate was from the river. He charged into the water.
Yes, let's hope WA Tourism doesn't read Dave's book.
All right. Well, I'm gonna carry on with this, Mike. So, Red River Road is about a young woman who's travelling solo along the Coral Coast of WA, so between Perth and Exmouth. And she's doing that, trying to find out what happened to her sister Phoebe, who went missing doing the same trip a year earlier. So she's essentially trying to put herself in Phoebe's shoes and retrace her steps. And I couldn't decide on which part of the landscape to highlight in this reading because the fictional road trip follows the real itinerary from Perth to Exmouth, stopping at all those wonderful spots along the way. So I thought I'd just read from the beginning and give you a little sense of the tone and, again, of the danger that I'm feeding into in terms of what we perceive to be the dangers of van life and what they actually are. So for context, this comes right at the beginning. It's in the first chapter. We've got Katie. When we first meet her, she's driving alone at night and she's fatigued. She's in a state of emotional precarity. She is disorientated and bewildered and in a bit of a grief spiral. She very quickly notices a vehicle driving behind her, bearing in mind if you've ever been to that area, they are very long, lonely roads. There's a vehicle behind her, it's driving erratically. It comes up very quickly behind her and sort of almost runs her off the road, at which point she pulls over, heart beating quickly, and stops the van, cannot get it to work again, so the engine's dead, phone dies, she's in the middle of nowhere, can't see any other option other than to just sit tight and wait till morning. She falls asleep. I wake to the muffled sound of rustling grass and snapping twigs. My eyes fly open and I stare out through the windscreen, studying the shadows beyond. On the surface, nothing has changed. I'm still in the van, still parked on the side road. It's still dark outside. But in my bones, I know that something is different. I click on the interior lights, then hit the switch for the LEDs in the back. Their dim glow spills from the windows and illuminates the patch of dirt around the van, but not much more. Then I catch movement to my right. The wave of a branch in the wind, a prowling animal. I press my face against the window, cup my hands to the glass. Maybe I imagined it? But no, there it is again. A kind of disturbance, a wrinkle on the surface of the night. Somewhere out there, something is moving. I know I should stay put, that it's much safer inside the van than out, but I can't help myself. I'm already pushing the door open and stepping out onto the cold ground. From what I can see, the road is narrower than I first thought. Little more than a mud track through a tangle of scrub, probably leading to a farm or a rural estate. I have no interest in following it, though. The last thing I need right now is some creepy old house. I turn instead to face the highway, but I can't even see it anymore. It's likely I've travelled miles into the wilderness instead of just a few yards. Gradually, I become aware of soft sounds hovering in the air like dragonflies. Bugs, leaves, breeze, frogs. Glasses are falling down my nose. Human sounds too. Breath huff, soul slap, stone skitter. Hello? Drawing my phone from my pocket, I activate the torch. The beam is too weak to penetrate much more than the shadows at my feet, but up ahead I swear I can see someone. My heart sputters. Yes, up ahead, standing on the track, a woman wearing yellow. Phoebe? I inhale and a sweet, familiar scent fills my nose. Phoebes? Is that you? It defies all rationality and logic, but I'm convinced it's her. She's here. Sticking to the trail and holding my phone out in front, I take a step forward, then another and another. I pick up my pace and leave the van behind. Trees tower above me like tall humans, their trunks smooth and rumpled like folds of skin. Somewhere nearby, the water is trickling. The horizon is swollen with hills, coal black against a vast star-speckled sky. Finally, I stop. I can't see her anymore, can't hear her. Please, I whisper, shivering. Please come back. The track is empty. Red dirt has become sand, the trees replaced by seagrass. The ocean is close. But there's no one here but me, no other voices or beating hearts. I was wrong. She isn't here. I'm alone. I'm just going to skip a bit and just quickly read this last bit. So she then goes back to the van. Following the track back the way I came, I return to the van, climb in and tuck myself behind the wheel. Hello again, square one. In the end, I decide that pushing on is the lesser evil. Wherever I am, either something is off or I'm seeing things, and neither problem will be solved by darkness and solitude. I'm much better off finding the next campsite and the company of other people. At least I've had a power nap. Starting the engine, I turn the van around and follow the track back to the highway. At first, it's just a feeling, an inexplicable pressure shift, like a descent into deep water. I can't put my finger on it, but as soon as the tires hit the tarmac, I can tell that something is wrong. Frowning, I study my mirrors, searching for headlights, but there are no speeding cars this time. I check the wings again, my eyes jumping from the road ahead to the road behind and back again. Nothing. But then my attention snags. I adjust the rear view so I can see the van's interior, angling it down towards the floor of the van, then up and around the sides. And then I see it. A ripple, like the sheets are breathing, like the van itself is alive. Next, I hear a soft an echo of my own breath. I inhale and hear it again. I exhale to a second whoosh of expelled air. My stomach flips, that feeling when the roller coaster starts to drop. The bed sheets are breathing. The blanket is a weird shape, all bunched to one side. The mattress is lumpy. It hits me like an electric shock. I'm not alone.
There you go. Three very different takes on WA, and I think that's kind of highlights one of the challenges about this panel is sort of what is WA? Like when we kind of talk about WA as a place, where do you start? And sort of why did each of you choose the locations that you did for your stories?
I was just going to say, Anna, while you were doing that, I forgot that I was here. Like, I was just like listening like this the whole time. And then I was like, oh, hang on, that's right, I'm going to say. It was amazing reading. So the reason, obviously, why I chose the RIP, a lot of you already know this, especially my right clubbers. I grew up on Rottnest Island as a child. My dad and my parents owned a boat brokerage down in Fremantle, so we were always on Rottnest. My siblings went to school there. We spent basically every weekend, holidays, and like I said, during the school term as well. So it was a place I almost felt like I couldn't not write about it. It's a place that is just, it's so etched in every essence of my being, the smells, the sounds, the sights. I go there still probably 5 times a year now. And I chose this place as well, not just because of all that, but I felt like it's a really great place for a thriller because people do just treat it like this party island, like a holiday town. And in all the years that I've been there, and in my experience as a child, we never really heard of any experiences with, kids going missing or getting, taken or just anything like that. And I used to always wonder, and I still do wonder, why that is, because it is this place where we do let our kids just roam free. Like I said in the beginning, we give them, money, they go off. And I would never do that, like down in Fremantle, in Perth or whatever. I'd never just go, yeah, just go. And there are so many dangers on the island. So I kind of felt like this is such a good place to set it because people are just way too carefree on that island. And so I just felt like this is a great story for a child going missing, and a lot of West Aussies would actually, when they've read the book, they've just said to me, "Oh my gosh, you're making me feel sick now." Like when I think about going back there and actually how casual we are with our kids, and so there's lots of different reasons why I said it there in WA, but mainly because it is my childhood and that was my experience.
It's really iconic. I'll just say it's really iconic for all West Australians. Rottnest. It's the place that here you have schoolies and people go to the Gold Coast, whatever. But in Perth, you go to Rottnest, and that's the first part you kind of transition. And Holly's kind of ruined it for me because I've been, not only that, I've been working on a song, a Christmas song, Rottnest Christmas. I figured WA needed its own Christmas song, so now everyone's going to be scared shitless and they won't.
When I was kind of prepping for this, I was reading your book, Holly, and then, as you do when you're doing these things, you start looking at people's socials, and you were actually on Rottnest doing a writers group there, and it was like the house was from the book, and I was going, this is like so meta, this is like really another level of marketing.
I know, yeah, no, like I said, I'm always there with my kids and everything, but we just recently, about 3 weeks ago, Deb and I in the front here, we ran our own writers retreat over there, which was amazing. But it's one of those places as well where the minute you get on the ferry and then you land on the island, you really do just forget like what's going on back home. And yeah, I know, I've been there so many times since the RIP came out. It looks like marketing, but it's really just because I love the island.
And so, Dave, I guess with yours, it's slightly different because, you're not from the Kimberley. No. Your character's based in Broome. So how did you go about sort of setting your work there?
Well, look, 2006 was when I had the idea of doing this because I'd already had some books and then, books for me anyway. I wasn't one of the 3 or 4 authors in Australia who can make a living just out of being an author. So I was doing screenwriting, but to pay for the family. But I loved the idea of, I always loved books, probably my main passion, and writing novels. And I'd been reading a couple of books, authors in particular, Henning Mankell, the Swedish author, and James Lee Burke, American author. And both of those authors doing crime and mystery had such a huge sense of place in the book. That was really the main character of all their books. And I thought at the time, gee, I should do something like this in Australia. And it should be something that's really distinctive and unique anywhere in the world, so that the same as I love the fir forests of Henning Mankell when he's describing them, even though I've never been there. And I thought, look, where in Australia could I write some crime that is totally unique, that's nowhere else like it in the world? And I thought the Kimberley. I'd done, I think, 2 or 3 band trips to Broome and a few of the islands and around there, just playing with the band. So I certainly wasn't a Kimberley local, and had to do a lot of research going online and speaking to people. You'd ring people who'd lived up there, and of course they all had different times and explanations, and it never worked. Oh, how long does it take to get from that on the Gibb River Road? It was nothing ever matched. So to some extent, you do your own thing, but it wasn't until 2013 that I started writing the first of the Dan Clement books. This is the 4th. But that was really, the idea was I wanted somewhere unique that was vast, and I thought this idea of a cop up there policing an area that's, as big as England is really great. You have to fly. So I just naturally thought it led to storytelling. And then, when you're up there, and as I say, I was lucky enough a few years ago to get up to Kununurra. I'd only been to Broome and Derby and that part. I hadn't been around Lake Argyle and that far east Kimberley, and where crocodiles are a real thing. And you step around there, they are lying on the rock, and so I just thought that was exciting too. And I had such a good time there. I wanted to set something up there.
I do think this is probably the first book I've read where a crocodile is the murder weapon. I thought, it is so genius. Why has no one ever done this before? You're eating the evidence.
Yeah, well, look, you do. I'm sure, all crime authors here, we're always trying to find perhaps a different way that somebody might be, the body might have been rendered. And I usually try and start off a book something like, in the Dan Clement series anyway, which is police procedural, something like that. So yes, the idea of a crocodile being the murder weapon. Thank you, Andy. I'm glad it resonated.
No, it did. I was trying to be fair and share my questions, but a quick one. The difference between screenwriting and writing a novel. I mean, I find when I'm writing a book, I want to be writing a screenplay, and when I'm writing a screenplay, I want to be writing a book. How do you sort of manage the two sort of mindsets?
I think whether it's because of the work that I did with the screenplay, I'm not sure, because I wrote my first book before I ever did anything for screen. But these days, I certainly, as I'm writing, I see it like a screenplay, and even where it's interesting is, I think, and I found this out on one of the books that I did where I adapted a screenplay, Over My Dead Body, which was my idea that Sherlock Holmes comes back and is alive, and what I found, I'd written the screenplay for that, and working on that, and I thought the screenplay worked fine. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek. You'd never get up in Australia because the budget was too big, but it was a great notion, high concept, sort of fun. But when you're doing a film, you really only have an external point of view. Yes, the camera can pan to that person or that person, but and so when I was writing it, I've got about 40 pages in following the screenplay, and then I went, well, whose point of view am I writing this from? It's a film. I can show Sherlock getting changed, and I can show Watson, who was female, doing her thing. So I think that's one of the things, is that this is just in terms of the technique, is that in a screenplay, you're largely external. You've got, in an Australian television series, for example, 50 scenes, and you can't go over that because it'll blow the budget, and so there are certain constraints. The other thing, and from my point of view, the most important thing, is that when you're doing a screenplay, the writer might originally conceive in a feature film, or in a TV, you're writing to pre-existing characters, and really you're pretty low on the pecking order when it comes to things. You deliver the stuff, but then once it's delivered, everyone else has the say. Whereas when you're writing a book, you remain the, master of your own destiny.
Very true. Well, Anna, I wanted to ask a question. Sort of, Dave reminded me of it there. Your story has a really interesting take on point of view, because you've got multiple points of view, and not only are you dealing with multiple characters, but those characters are not necessarily telling the truth. So how did you kind of judge, what was too far? How did you pull it back? How did you kind of manage all those different voices?
With difficulty. It was quite challenging because and it's hard to answer that question without spoilers because there are reasons for the way that it's told, and I think the only thing I can really say is that I tried it a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I kind of had different concepts, and again, it's that decision that you make about, why tell this story. I mean, obviously, there doesn't need to be a reason, does there? Like, you can just have a story for a story's sake, and you can have it in third person and have an omniscient narrative voice. You don't have to have a reason, but I feel like when I'm writing a book, I'm like, why is this story being told, and who benefits from it being told, and why, if I'm going to come at it from a kind of a close third or even a first person point of view, I need to interrogate the reasons why that person might be and who they might be talking to, for what purpose is it there for, and that just really helps me with a bit of truth and authenticity and motivation. I tried it a lot of different ways, and the way that it currently is made the most sense by the end.
Yeah. Because it's also like you're also really playful with it because you there's third person, there's first person. Like it's kind of, you don't tend to see that a lot in books, and like that's a real strength of that novel is that you manage that so well. Again, like was that just about that was the best voice for that character, or?
Well, and it's also about the distance that you get from them and about how you get to know them and why.
Yep.
So I think it's about being very clear in my own head about why those characters are there. Why are they the ones through whose eyes you're seeing the story? I mean, the premise is that they're looking for what happened to this person called Phoebe, and you really need to get to know her. So what is the most truthful, realistic, sort of believable way you can hear from her? Well, if we're retracing her steps, let's look through her Instagram posts. Let's look through the documents that we have. That is her way of telling the story. When you're creating posts on social media, when you're curating your own sort of outward image, you're telling a story. You're saying particular things about yourself. But the most interesting thing to me about that is that you can curate a lie. It's not necessarily revealing, and you can kind of design something that sort of obscures more than it reveals. And then with the other characters, I think, just weighing up how much intimacy we needed from them, how much distance we might need, and what the purpose is very specifically of them being the ones who get a voice.
Yeah. And then, so when you're kind of in that sort of drafting process, you then sort of did the road trip. That was after a draft?
Yeah. So the reason that I decided to, I knew that I wanted to write something about van life, and it was mainly just because in 2021 I was, we were in those rolling lockdowns and I was just obsessed with travel, and also I was very much noticing that trend in kind of Australian crime fiction. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I write crime. I would say it's more psychological thriller. But still, that whole outback noir thing. There's a lot of small towns with big secrets. Great, valid, love it. But for me, I'm like, what can I do that's a bit different? Like, how can I shake things up a bit? So I was like, much in the same way that Ben Stevenson has done with the Everybody on This Train, I wanted something that moved constantly. I didn't want to be anchored to any particular point or town. I wanted kind of constant movement, velocity, where the landscape's kind of constantly changing. So I hit upon this van life idea. I spoke to a friend who'd recently completed a big lap of Australia and kind of roughly outlined my idea. And I said, I really need a landscape that's going to be shifting and changing, and maybe like an itinerary that starts in a relatively kind of familiar terrain and just increasingly gets more and more hostile and potentially dangerous. And she said, oh my God, you have to look at WA, particularly maybe that coral coastline, because there are, it's where the desert meets the sea. There are gorges, there are cliffs, there are wildflowers, there are, there are these long distances that are just ridiculously remote. You can drive for like 6 hours and just not stop, like on a straight road. And what was the original question? I've just gone off like on a WA tangent. Was it about...
The purpose of the question was to ask whether the actually going and doing the road trip then
Right.
kind of changed anything in
Right.
the...
So at that point, I fell in love with the itinerary for all of those purposes. And I started researching it, but it was 2021 and WA's hard borders were still in place. So I had this horrible kind of conundrum, which was, do I change it, even though I feel like, because the best thing about that itinerary for me as well, that I felt like it had the potential not just to colour and flavour the narrative, but to shape it. And I feel like the structure of that book was informed directly by how the landscape changes. It sort of is its own story, and the way that it does kind of build to this mad sort of Ningaloo climax. Narratively, I mean, like the landscape itself, And so I was like, well, do I change it because I can't get there? Or do I just stick with it and just write what I know is going to be good with taking the risk that I might not actually get to go there? So I was sort of almost finishing the first draft, and then the borders opened and I booked a ticket and I got on Camplify and I rented a van, almost exactly the same thing, with the same aesthetic that I imagined they'd be driving in. And I did I kind of lived the bones of the story. And I stopped in all of the places, saw all of the beauty spots, took all of the pictures that I imagined Phoebe would have taken, and it was like quite literally kind of living a dream.
Yeah, it's incredible. It sort of makes you want to travel again.
Oh, it was amazing. I really, really recommend it. Van life is fantastic.
I'm so glad you said that, because I remember asking an author once about, how they kind of researched their location because it was so authentic, and they go, hey, Google Maps.
Well, you can, and I before that point, I really did my due diligence. I was like, I'm not going to be this horrendous person, particularly from England, who's going to write about WA without really working hard to authenticate it. So, I mean, you can do a lot with Google Maps. And I read all the guidebooks and all the travel blogs, and I actually conducted Zoom interviews with solo female travellers who were on the road from their vans. I did everything that I could possibly think of. But I don't think there's any substitute for immersion. And I also think that it is the best antidote to cliche, because you are forced to engage with the landscape and the environment in a way that's really personal to you. It brings about associations that you never would have thought about. The smells, the colour, the grit between your toes. There's a kind of sense, particularly out there in that country, that it's astounding, and you're awestruck, and it's there's so much beauty in your eyeballs, but at the same time, you kind of feel at the, what's the word? Like, you kind of feel almost held hostage by the environment. And very much like one of the solo female travelers I interviewed said to me that she loves it. And so she's trying to always get her friends to come out with her. But when she's travelled with friends, a couple of those friends have said, I'm not comfortable. I feel like I'm not so much exploring the land as it's exploring me. And you feel very, held hostage by the land, because they're so vulnerable, because there are points at which the scale and the scope of the land that you're on, but also you're just so cut off. There's no one around, and I could tell you so many anecdotes. I got stuck on a pastoral station on the Ningaloo Reef where I had that feeling, and the storm came in, and it was horrible. But there's also lots and lots of good stories as well.
Were you there alone? Who did you do it with?
I went with my husband,
Yeah.
mainly because he could not conceive of a reality where I would get to go on holiday to WA and he would not. And he was like, there's just no way you're doing that on your own. I want to do that too. So I'm like, it's nothing to do with my safety. Right, fine.
I just didn't want to miss out.
Also, it was really helpful because, it's 2,500k round trip, and we did it in 10 days. So it meant that, you know, we were able to swap with the driving, but he did a lot of the driving, and I actually wrote in the passenger seat as we went, you know, took notes and yeah, so I didn't go alone. But I did then do Perth to Margaret River on my own in a camper van, just to prove everybody that I could
that's where
do it.
that's where the wineries are, of course. But
I was like, I have to, I've got to go.
I was going to ask you, Holly, and put it over, because what's interesting is that your you have people all around. In fact, in your book, it's on an island, but it's everyone's there the whole time. And in fact, people are trying to get away from it, but it's still that kind of sense of threat. So it doesn't matter. You know, our ones, it's a threat because there's no one around and anything can happen. Yours is...
the killer could come at any moment, that kind of feeling. Yeah. And also just that feeling, and I like you're saying, islands as well have that feeling of like isolation and entrapment. And because they weren't allowed to leave the island, so it's that same sort of feeling.
Did you know that there's an actual sort of psychological malady called rock fever, which is about like a psychological sickness that you get whilst on an island because you're cut off, and it has these kind of I'm gonna do a bit with it for book 4, I think.
I wonder how long until that kicks in.
Well, I can tell you, but
I've
maybe
never had
not for
that
this
at
panel.
Rottnest.
We'll talk afterwards. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I probably should take control of the panel.
Do your job.
Holly,
You can go get coffee if you want. We're all right.
I'm tempted to.
fine.
I mean, I do like it when guests, take over. But Holly, I did have a question for you because you are so familiar with Rottnest. Your immersion is sort of a lifetime, really. Did you find yourself pulling back from the real experience with your work?
No, not really, actually. One of the things I was most worried about was how people would perceive what I was writing about Rottnest, because it is such a, WA holiday destination. So there's definitely things in the book as well, like I've had to put in there for, fiction, like for the narrative to work the way I wanted to. So things like there's like a road going all the way through the island, and that the ferries are leaving at certain times. And so I actually put an author note in the front because I knew that West Aussies would be like, there is no road going through. Like, it's such a special place to us over there. But no, I didn't. I really just wanted to give the reader exactly my experiences there, and with the smells and the sounds and the sights. And what's funny about us three is we're all really into writing about setting and imagery, aren't we? A lot more than maybe some other psychological thrillers or whatever. Like, it's really a big thing, isn't it, in our books?
Yeah, I think for these three, it all is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely imperative, to getting an understanding of the books. And as you say, it's also things. It's like the sense of smell and touch and those other senses that are not totally obvious. But I was curious, as to that question you were saying, because you are not so well known there, whether you felt the need with your particular friends, etc., thinking, because I think Holly's book of the three is the one that most goes into kind of the social mores of what people do, and I wondered whether you felt that your friends might be judging you, or you might be judging them, I should say.
Oh, definitely. My main character, Penny, I hate my main character. And so what I did was I picked two people that I really don't like, and I meshed their personality and made her Penny. But no, there was no judgment. I think because of the fact that I did live there and my, brother and sister went to school there was none of that kind of judgment of, why are you writing about this? You don't know about this place. So, yeah. Anyway.
Have you had any pushback?
No, none whatsoever. No, I've been really lucky. More than anything, just people saying, oh my gosh, this is just exactly like it. Like, you've just nailed the atmosphere. Or I've had readers be on Rottnest Island reading the book, and then they've said, I'm just looking at all the boats thinking, which one is Edmund on? And you know what I mean? Really getting invested in the story. Yeah.
I had a question for you, Dave, and that was, this is the 4th I think I said fifth earlier by mistake, but the fourth of the in this series. How do you kind of continue exploring a character after you've sort of already developed them like this?
Yeah, look, it's a very pertinent point, and what I do deliberately almost is I don't do my books generally in sequence. So, there'll be one or two books before I would even think of coming back to Dan Clement, maybe one or two. But it is one of the first. Generally, what happens with me with any book or story is I have an idea that I think that would be a great story. That would make a great story, and then I work out: do I need to create a new detective, or do I need a protagonist that may not be a detective? Or are they already there in the books that I've done? And in the case of Dan Clement, the very first book that I did with him, I was thinking of using my character who I'd created in my first book, City of Light, was another Snowy Lane, a sort of a former cop who'd become a private detective, and I realised that wouldn't work for what I needed, so I created Dan. And then once I've got this idea of, well, what's the book roughly going to be about, and this one was unusual because, as I say, normally I have this kind of light bulb moment where I go, oh, that would be a great story, and I write from that. With this one, I thought, gee, I'm missing Dan a bit. I haven't done him for a year or two. I'd like to come back and do him and the small group of cops and stuff that he works with. And, what could I didn't actually have a light bulb moment, but each of my titles is things like Before It Breaks, Clear to the Horizon, and just out of the air came When It Rains It Pours. And I thought, oh, maybe that's a good idea, that Dan's sitting there. He's been through 3 books now. He's had a couple of high moments of which happens in the books where it's life and death, and now nothing's happened for a year or two, and he's a bit bored and saying to himself, I should get out. I should go back to Perth, go back where the big smoke, where there's some action. And of course, immediately you say that, never, never wish for it because it happens. And so it all. And I thought, well, that's good. He's inundated by all these different crimes, which may or may not be related. So then I had to actually think, well, where is he in his life? Because he started off at one point where he was trying to save a marriage that was, busted apart, and then he's had to go through the books and reconciling himself. So in this one, he's just at the start of a new relationship, and so that feeds into the book again, and, where's he at in his life? So I think for me that they're trying to balance the external story and the plot, something exciting, and then the internal story that we all feel every day of our lives when we get up. Where are we at? And, we're heading in the right direction. And I think as Dan goes with his little shopping bag and he gets some sausages and something else, and he goes, oh, this is, this is the pits. This is like, I'm the classic middle-aged guy who gets the milk, the small milk for one and the sausages and, nothing else. So, but to me that's worth exploring in that case.
I really enjoyed reading an older character as well, and those struggles that he's going through, and where is my life at, and what am I going to do for the next 10 years of my working life, and
this is the advantage of getting old. You see, Andy, he started as a younger man, and he is getting older. But good. Well, as I think Anna was saying, and Holly, writing from what sometimes I stretch out and have characters that I would have no idea of their life. But in Dan's case, there are certainly cross points and things that, where as an older guy, I can go, this is where the world's becoming challenging for me.
And I was going to ask you sort of a similar question, but, with your works, they're standalone, they're not a series.
Yes.
Thanks.
How do you go about sort of selecting a character? Is it story first or character first?
I think I don't have a clear answer to that. I feel like at book 3, I'm still kind of figuring out how I do things, and each ideation stage has been different, and each book has come about in a different way. This one definitely came van life first, setting, and then I was like, I had the thing in my mind that I kind of, the hidden thing. And then I sort of crafted the characters around that. So who would be in this kind of situation? Who would that be? What would they need? What do they want? What's going to stop them from getting it? So it was much more of a kind of like a curation, a design of a character, and much more methodological. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. There's method in the madness.
Yes. Whereas with The Safe Place, it was all character first. It was all, Emily was just so clear in my mind, and I was like, what is she going to do? Where is this going to take her? What happens if we do this to her? What happens if she feels, this or discovers this, and blah, blah, blah. And then out of that requirement comes a figure like Scott Denny, and then you go, well, yeah, because, of course, his needs would go against that, and what happens if they clash in this way? So that The Safe Place was all character, and the Shadow House, I think, again, that was really complicated as well, because I had this first failed draft of that, which was entirely based on situation. It's like I now think that I have a lot to say about whether or not an idea is a situation or an idea. Do you know what I mean? Like, does it have legs? Is it just a cool situation? Or does it have some gas in the tank to take you all the way through? Because that first, I was so like, it's just such a cool idea. How can we put it into action? And then I got to the end of the draft and I was like, nobody wants anything. Nobody's kind of, nobody's trying hard. Like, the characters aren't there. And so that's how I kind of rewrote that. So it just depends. Sometimes it's plot dependent and plot requirements, because I really want to explore a particular thematic. I think with the Red River Road, the idea, again, like right at the beginning, was about, I really want to say something about women's safety. I really want to say something about what we think will happen to women on the road and what actually does. I really want to say something about our narratives, particularly like crime and thriller authors. What are we putting out there? What kind of unhelpful narratives about safety and women travelling do we kind of, are they knee-jerk kind of narratives that we're throwing out there because it's fun and they're going to sell? And what kind of, cultural messaging, what kind of wash of messaging does that maybe contribute to? What maybe are we obscuring with those things? So it was very much like, I really want to say something about this. And then the setting came and the van life, and then I was like, okay, what kind of people do I need? Yeah.
It's really because you kind of touch on that in your sort of afterword, author's afterword. And I think it's again like another success of the book is it's not preachy in dealing with those themes, and you don't really know that that's what you're doing until you kind of get to the end. So yeah, it was really good. Holly, I had a quick question for you, because I'm sort of conscious that I was very nervous about not having questions at the end and running out of things to say, and someone down the back is flashing numbers at me. We kind of touched very briefly on you sort of mushing two people together to create your characters. You've got two very distinct voices in your work. How did you sort of go and sort of in navigating those? And I think you've kind of already answered it, but is there sort of one that you enjoyed writing more than the other?
Yeah, I think for me, with my two protagonists, Penny and Eloise, who share the narrative, like it basically is chapter by chapter, two different protagonists. I really felt like with you, your message was about, female safety with travel. Mine was always, this one with the RIP, I felt like was a lot to do with motherhood and identity and how women treat other women, especially when you've got like little kids, and just really about my experiences with motherhood and mothers groups and play groups and competitiveness and keeping up with the Joneses and all that kind of stuff. So there were two I don't like both of my characters. I can't stand either of them. And it's because, and I find it so fun to write about though when they are that way as well, like rather than your sweet kind of lovely character. But I really just wanted to show these women who are just so competitive with each other. So it's very psychological, this one, like not just about a child who goes missing. It's about kind of the conflicts surrounding that and the relationships and how they react to that. And I wanted to show that, I feel like, because even though these women who are, pretending to be perfect mothers and capable and all of that, underneath they've got all these insecurities and flaws, which I feel like a lot of, in my experience, that's kind of often the case. Like we've all got anxieties, we all have issues and flaws, and a lot of the time we never want to show it, but I definitely wanted to show it within these characters.
Can I say something? I feel like it's so funny that you say that you hated them. I mean, they're very kind of challenging individuals, but like I read it as a book about like sort of almost shame and envy, and
Yeah.
if we could as women kind of not fight our envy so much, but almost hold it and understand it as something that can reveal our needs and our wants.
Yeah.
I feel like these two
They
women
would come together.
they have no idea what they want
No.
or what they need,
No.
and they see things in other people and they look at them and go, shit, that's what I should be doing.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I am, therefore I hate you.
Yeah.
Rather
Yeah.
than going, how does that feeling explain, how does it sort of say something about what I'm missing or what I would like? Or,
And then they would probably come together, which they do
Yeah.
kind of near the end, where they do see each other being vulnerable and then start kind of coming together. So I feel like it is a lot about female relationships in this book as well. Yeah.
Well, as I said, we're kind of, flicking through my pages and pages of notes and questions. There's another number as flashed up at the back of the room. I suppose I'll cut to my last couple of questions. So how different, this is for all three of you, how different was the first draft to the last draft? And what lessons did you take away from this book in terms of writing and what you'll do next time?
Trying to think. Got to go back a way now. How different was it, the first draft or the last draft? I think this one, I had a beginning in mind. I generally have a beginning and end in mind, so I had something like that, but I did kind of organically work through in terms of the plot and twists. They changed, so it did change a bit, and that's not unusual for me. Like generally I have a skeleton that I follow now. Not the very first book, I had no idea what I was doing, but from then on I have a skeleton. I tend to follow that through, so I have an idea where I'm going to finish up, but it's not uncommon for me that particularly the ending, as I'll go through it, I will change and perhaps change the identity of who the killer is or the person, and so it was a bit of an organic process through that. And I can't remember the other part of the question, but in terms of, for me, I kind of knew roughly where it was going, but it did vary as it as it expanded.
Yep.
Yeah, I normally will always write a synopsis to start with, and then from there I kind of know how it's going to end in my head, and then things just kind of change as I go along because I'm a pantster. So even though I've got my synopsis, I just sit down and write the scenes. So things will change, but I feel like I've got to be excited while I'm writing, and if I'm not excited, then I feel like the reader won't be either. But I'm always edging towards that end, knowing how it's going to end. So through writing a synopsis first.
Well, mine was a really discombobulating experience. I wrote my first draft of this book was 120,000 words, and I gave it into my publishers sort of thinking, well, this is not perfect, and I get that, but I really need some help at this point. But I was thinking, like, it's all right. It's quite good. And I got the feedback that I got back was just like, this is just a kind of an epic character study. Like everybody's just walking around feeling things, and there's no real drive. And one of my publishers actually described it as turgid. I was like, oh, ouch. But the reason is that what I tend to do is, because I'm an actor and I live in the subtext naturally. The way that I've been trained to tell stories is through kind of inhabiting characters. That's how I discover them. I am all emotion. And so what happens is I tend to have an idea where, however it's come from, be it character or be it, thematics, and I'll go bam, 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 like really good synopsis, strong premise, strong hook, and then it's like I've got my engine, and then I just put it down and I just walk away. And I walk for a very, very, very long time. And then I reach what I think is my destination, and I stop and I go, I've arrived! And my publishers go, you've actually left your engine way back there. Can you go back and get it? And I'll go, mm-hmm. And I'll walk all the way back again, pick up my engine, and then insert it into the story. So that's what happened with Red River Road. And so the first draft had so many more characters. There's a young 15-year-old boy in it, and that backstory was so blown out because there was so much sort of justification for things and kind of necessary backstory that I wanted to put in there, just for that thing of no, it happens because of this. But then what I did was I sort of inadvertently invented a story that was, the backstory was way more interesting than the forestory. So my editor was like, well, that kind of, really eclipses what's going on in the first half. So there was just so much then just rooting out and pulling back out. And so this time for book 4, this is how I always begin a book. Like, I'm going to do it differently this time. I'm going to nail it. But this time I'm really trying hard to keep the engine nice and close and not worry too much about kind of description of setting and kind of really delving into the finer points, which is kind of my natural way of doing it. I mean, if you think about it, as an actor, you're given material and your job is to interpret it, and then your job is to add colour and flavour, and that's how I approach first drafts. I kind of sit in it and I walk around in it and I feel it, and then because I'm a genre fiction writer, everybody goes, but you haven't done any of the genre fiction writing things. So, but that's fine. I think we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and our brains all work really differently. And I feel like I'm quite happy that my brain does those things. It's a little unfortunate that they do them first, but that's fine. I'll work it out.
Well, it's probably a wonderful point to end as the 0 is flashing at the back of the room. Please thank our panellists in exploring WA crime. There will be a signing at the bookshop, so if you want to kind of wander over and grab a haul of books, you can do that. And we do ask that as you leave the room, remember that there is a session afterwards, so please take everything with you so that the volunteers don't have to clean up after you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Andy.